Hey everybody, it's Sister Liz here, and you are listening to In the Company of Charity podcast, a podcast by the Daughters of Charity, and you are in for a treat today, starting with the fact that we are actually physically in the same location.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Welcome. Hi, it's Sister Elizabeth, and we're in the same location, no Zoom calls, no trying to figure out how to talk to each other. So we're at a Sister Servants meeting, and maybe some other episode will explain exactly what the role of the Sister Servant is and why we're meeting.
Not superior.
Not
Sister
superior.
Servant.
Servant to the servants.
But we're excited because I'm an Elizabeth Ann, my co-host is an Elizabeth Ann, and we have Sister Betty Ann who's going to be on the show today. She is awesome.
And she's going to be talking about Saint Elizabeth Ann, not to be confused with any of us, nor are we to be confused with her, because she's a saint. I hope this is a two-part podcast too, so you're probably hearing this intro with the first part where Sister Betty Ann will tell us much about the life of Elizabeth Ann Seton. And I just find that this story is so amazing, and I know you find it very compelling as well, Sister Elizabeth.
Her life never gets old.
Yeah.
It doesn't, because there's something for everybody. So as you're listening, you're going to find something that strikes you that is compelling for you, and an opportunity to meditate and to get to know Elizabeth Ann Seton better. What a great, and I love to call her Mother Seton, because that was her title eventually as a foundress of a new community, and you're going to hear all about it in this episode.
Yeah, and it's great. Sister Betty Ann is like the premier quintessential speaker about this. So she just tells the story in a way that absolutely you can find something in it that can relate to yourself. The second episode is when you're going to get to hear about Sister Betty Ann herself, about how she came to love this woman, how she came to love this saint who, who's just a really important person in the life of the Daughters of Charity in the United States. Very unique position and experience.
So great episode. Enjoy it. Happy Easter, everybody. And as always, you're in our prayers and for your needs and what you're going through. And if you're going through something, you want to listen to this episode, because Mother Seton had tremendous amounts of difficulties and sufferings in her life, and I think we have a lot to learn from her story.
Yeah, so I hope everyone enjoys this episode, and next 2 weeks we'll come out with the second, so be prepared.
Bye, everybody.
So welcome, everyone. As you know, I'm Sister Elizabeth, and you are listening to In the Company of Charity, the podcast of the Daughters of Charity. And I am in the company today of Sister Betty Ann McNeil, who is at the DePaul University, and she is currently the Vincentian Scholar in Residence, which is just a wonderful, wonderful identification and title for her, because Sister Betty Ann was one of the first teachers in the charism and in the history and life of the community that I had as a newer member. I would have said younger sister, but since I was 36 at the time, I'll forego that identity. But as a newer member, having good formators, having people who can really help you to understand the charism of your new community is vital. And Sister Betty Ann was one of those people for me. So Sister Betty Ann, we welcome you to the podcast today.
Thank you, Sister Elizabeth. It's so nice to be invited. And, I love talking about the charism and St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. And I'm so glad you love the story, because I love hearing it.
Well, I think it's also very interesting. We have to say my co-host is Elizabeth Ann, Sister Elizabeth Ann Schoberg. I am Sister Elizabeth Ann Grime, and you are Betty Ann. Right?
That's right.
So Sister
My
Betty
baptismal
Ann.
name.
Yes. I was referred to as a child Betty Ann. So we're just in the whole breadth of this amazing saint that we're going to talk about today, Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton. And we did have a while back, earlier in this fourth season, we did an interview with Lisa, who is at the shrine, the National Shrine of Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton in Emmitsburg, where we lived and moved and had our being way back when in my seminary days. And she did a lovely job. It was great. You should all go back and listen to that episode. She did a great job in helping us understand the shrine and helping us understand the life and the day-to-day of Elizabeth Ann Seton. But I'd like to talk today about the woman, about who is this person, not just the history, because we can look at the history books, but I know you well enough to know that you understand this woman's psyche, why she did the things she did. And I think that's really important, because saints are saints because of their soul, right? It's not just the things they did, but it's how their soul reached out and what happened. And so I know Elizabeth Ann has many, many titles to her name: mother, teacher, saint now. But we want to talk today a little bit about St. Elizabeth Ann Seton as a woman who had a desire, and the desire was to teach. And I'd really like you to give us some information, but also what's your feeling of the essence of who she was as a woman as she began to see herself growing in her faith and in her mission in life, and how it impacted her movement toward the charism. Big question, I know. We've got plenty of time, so I'm going to turn it over to you. It is.
That's
but
a
we've got
huge
time.
question, Sister Elizabeth.
Yeah.
However, let me say, Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton, she wasn't born a saint. She's Betsy Ann Bayley, who later became Mrs. William McGee Seton, and later Mother Seton, who heard God's call and responded to God's grace and became a saint. And today, she is a model and an intercessor for everyone. But if we just backtrack and look at her as a woman, as a young girl, we really don't know how she was educated in terms of a school, because she really doesn't tell us. But we do know from her copybook, her school books, and her ability to write and communicate that she was extremely literate for her day. And her father was a physician, and the family must have had books in the house. Of course, the Bible was a great piece of literature. And as a young married woman, she was a member of the New York Public Library and checked out books, and they still have her records of what she checked out. But after her marriage and unfortunate death of her father-in-law, and subsequently her own father, and her husband's family business was beginning to fall apart financially because of piracy on the seas, etc. And his health began to deteriorate and ultimately ended in bankruptcy. In fact, the law for bankruptcy had recently been enacted, and he took advantage of it, so he didn't have to go to debtor's prison. And in that effort to help him improve his health, they took the dramatic action of a sea voyage to Tuscany, where there were business and family friends. And that's where she met Roman Catholicism for the first time. And tragically, she left there as a widow at age 29. When she returned to New York and really pondered and discerned and decided that she wanted to embrace the true faith. And she believed, after research and comparisons, that Roman Catholicism was where she wanted to place her heart. And she made a formal profession of faith in the Catholic Church at St. Peter's on Barclay Street. It was very hard for her to get employment. Women didn't work out of the home, and people were suspicious of Catholics, and there was a lot of prejudice and bigotry against Roman Catholics. She was unable to really get employment. At one point, she got one teaching position, and within 3 months, the school flopped, went bankrupt. It was not her school. She was an employee. Then she became a house mother for some boys boarding at St. Mark's School. And after I think some disciplinary action that the children's parents didn't agree with, they took their children out. So she was really penniless and unemployed and moving from one low-income apartment or house or room to another, until by chance, divine providence, she bumped into a Sulpician priest from Baltimore who was traveling to Boston, and he ran a boys' school. And when he met her, he thought, wow, this woman could provide education for girls. And one thing led to another, and she was invited and moved to Baltimore. But before that, as a married woman, after her father-in-law died, her father-in-law had been married twice and had 13 children in both marriages. And Elizabeth's husband was the oldest of all. Therefore, the younger children that were orphaned, she took into their home and sent the older ones to boarding school. But together with her own little ones and these younger Seton in-laws, she homeschooled them. It's at that point that she discovered, I really enjoy teaching. This is fun. I like helping the children to grow and develop. Well, that didn't last terribly long, but she had that good experience. And when she came to Baltimore, she started, we don't know the name of the school other than Mrs. Seton's school on Paca Street, but it was a school for girls, a school for Catholic girls to receive an education along with religious education and formation. She never had more than 10 children there as students, and that was by intention because the priests wanted it to be a very small school in the beginning, and then it could expand. Well, certainly it did expand because a donor came along and was also aware that she wanted to teach the faith to poor children. She had had the experience of being poor, penniless, and knew the struggle. She wanted to provide education for others, the children of other impoverished families. And this seminarian was a retired sea captain and had investments. And in order to pursue his call to the priesthood, he needed to divest himself of his financial resources. And as a convert himself, he believed that the faith would only grow in the new republic, the new world of North America, what we know as the United States, through education. And because boys were being educated in Baltimore with the idea of having a good education and then possibly entering the seminary and becoming the first generation of American clergy, he thought it was important to form young girls to be good wives and mothers who would nurture the faith within their family. And one thing led to another, and he made the offer of purchasing land with the designation or stipulation that it be near Emmitsburg, Maryland, where Father Dubois, John Dubois, had begun Mount St. Mary's College and Seminary and had a boarding school for boys. They found property in the Emmitsburg area, and he purchased it and really funded the initial operation of what became the Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph's, meaning of St. Joseph's Valley. Once the sisters got established, first in the stone house, and they built, which was an old 17th century farmhouse, they built another building that she named St. Joseph's House, which today may be visited. It's popularly known as the White House of Emmitsburg, but it was in that larger building that Mrs. Seton, now termed Mother Seton, and her first generation of Sisters of Charity began the school known as St. Joseph's School. This was her dream come true, to teach children who were poor. Initially, it was what they called day scholars, students who came from the area. Some lived up on the mountainside, some lived in town, some lived in the farms that were adjacent to the property. And that was fine for about 3 months. However, when one is operating a free school, there's no income coming in to pay bills. Therefore, she consulted with Bishop John Carroll and the Sulpicians, and they made some contacts with families in the Frederick County, Baltimore area, and further away too, who would like to send their daughters to a Catholic school, a boarding Catholic school, and pay tuition. So with that, St. Joseph's School in May of 1810 initiated the boarding program. That did not become known as until 1828 as St. Joseph's Academy, but it was St. Joseph's School with 2 programs, one for day students and one for boarding students for the first several years. And there were also some orphans that Mother Seton had, as well as the 2 students who had come with her from Baltimore. It seems to me that her philosophy of education is really derived from not only her love of children and love of the faith, but her deep desire to live out the Vincentian spirit, the Vincentian charism, the tradition of St. Vincent de Paul and St. Louise de Marillac, who founded the Daughters of Charity in France in the 17th century. And in fact, Mother Seton and the Sulpician fathers that were helping her and consulting with her and advising her, they were able to obtain a copy of the French rule of the Daughters of Charity, which Father Dubois translated, and Mother Seton studied it carefully and read it to the sisters, and almost everyone agreed with it and adopted it. She was the one who enculturated the charism first in the United States. There were no Daughters of Charity. French Daughters of Charity never came to the United States to set up the community. There were no priests of the mission. The congregation of the mission, priests and brothers, didn't arrive in the United States until 1816. So Mother Seton is the mother of the Vincentian family in the United States, and the one who not only planted the seed of the charism, but nourished it so that it would flourish among her Sisters of Charity. And it seems to me that directly from the rule that they adopted, which was modified a little bit for America to include a primary principal ministry of education of girls. And I see that as the core of what shaped the philosophy and methodology that she used in education. The education that the sisters offered was holistic. It was the heart, the head, and the spirit of female education. As a Vincentian woman, using today's terminology, we could say that she promoted Vincentian personalism as well as Vincentian professionalism. So the sisters were founded to honor our Lord Jesus Christ as the source and model of all charity. But then the secondary, but not less important end or means was to honor the sacred infancy of Jesus in young persons, in young girls whose heart, they were called upon to form in the love of God, the practice of virtue, and the knowledge of religion, while also sowing in their minds the seeds of useful knowledge, like arithmetic, parsing, diagramming sentences, English, French, translation and reading, use of the needle. A needlewoman was very, very important in those days. So to me, that's Mother Seton's approach to female education, that it was holistic. It wasn't so much employment oriented, but that type of skill that we know today for earning a living, but it was very much oriented to forming the whole person, forming a woman to be a wife, mother, and a practicing Catholic, and a educated woman who then could be a good mother and pass that knowledge on to her children. Because their school was rural and it was relatively small, I mean, it grew to 40 students within a fairly short period of time, but there was a family-like environment at St. Joseph's. And that helped the pupils to not only develop self-knowledge, but to develop a sense of esteem and acceptance of one another with all the individual idiosyncrasies and differences that come with humanity. Although the primary purpose was to educate Catholic girls, some parents asked if their Protestant children could come. And Mother Seton was quite open to that. Father Dubois wasn't, but she made the decision, and there were some children who were not Roman Catholic who attended the school, and they just simply didn't have to go to religion class. So there was diversity, Catholic and Protestants, tuition paying and free scholars, day pupils and boarders, as well as orphans, along with children from affluent families. Many people say, well, wasn't Mother Seton the foundress of the American Catholic school system? And that's a myth. That is incorrect. Mother Seton was a pioneer educator. She was a pioneer educator in Catholic education and in female education, but she did not establish the parochial school system. That honor is attributed to Bishop John Neumann, who established the first diocesan Catholic school system in Philadelphia in 1852. It seems to me that Mother Seton would be delighted with the philosophy of Pope Francis, because she was searching to help establish the faith in the new republic, in a new environment. And as she reached out to children, Pope Francis said recently, quote, "What or who do we take into our arms? Simeon took Jesus into his arms. It's a touching scene full of meaning and unique in the gospel. God has placed his son in our arms too, because embracing Jesus is the essential thing, the very heart of our faith," close quote. It seems to me that Mother Seton embraced each child in her own uniqueness and tried to bring the child to Jesus. In fact, Elizabeth Seton was the one who prepared the students for First Communion. You know, she had a great love of the Eucharist, and she was responding to a sign of her times. We're trying to respond to the signs of our times and caring better for the earth and saving our common home. she was responding to planting the seeds of the faith in the immigrants who were coming to become Americans and were setting up their new lives in this new republic, primarily in Maryland, which is where she lived after 1808. And because of her relationships with the families, the parents, and the alumni, and the students who were at Mount St. Mary's, because they went there to worship on Sundays, and she taught catechism, she was really interacting with the young men who were studying for the priesthood. And among that first generation of clergy who were ordained, most of them knew her. And it was from that generation that the majority of the first bishops of the United States were named. Therefore, when they went to their diocese and they wanted ministries, they contacted the Sisters of Charity in Emmitsburg, and that's one way the community spread throughout the United States, from 1828 to St. Louis, 1852 to California. But in Mother Seton's lifetime, she only sent sisters to 3 specific places. She made 3 foundations. First, in Philadelphia, St. Joseph's Orphan Asylum had been begun by lay managers, and they needed sisters to manage it. It was the first Catholic orphanage in the United States. Then she was concerned about Father Dubois, who was having some difficulty keeping lay help. So she sent some sisters up there to the mountain to take care of the infirmary, manage the domestic services, and oversee the chapel and liturgical services. Then 2 years later, in 1817, she was thrilled to be asked for sisters for her native city of New York. And she sent a group of sisters there, which to staff the Roman Catholic Orphan Asylum, as it was termed in those days. It seems to me that Mother Seton, Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton, is a woman who gives us a model for our times to have a renewed vision of what church can be, what Christian community can be, and a renewed vision for consecrated life, because she established the first apostolic society for religious women native to the United States in 1809. The Carmelites had come previously, and the Ursulines down in Louisiana, but they were communities that were in existence in Europe and were transplanted. The Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph's were a community new and native to North America, to the United States, to Maryland, and they were created to meet the needs of the American church, primarily education, but in the spirit of Vincent and Louise, service of the poor. However, those impoverished people needed assistance. She often spoke of her foundation at Emmitsburg as a little mustard seed. And we know how tiny a mustard seed is. And we know how tasty just a little tiny bit of mustard is. But she would say that the little mustard seed that was planted by God in America is growing and flourishing. And, we're still continuing the mustard seed, and it's the mustard plant, and it still has flavor. We are meeting the needs of our generation. And there are several communities that came from the Emmitsburg Foundation, and we're all united in the spirit of charity through the Sisters of Charity Federation today. So that's kind of an overview of who I see as St. Elizabeth Ann Seton, who began as Betsy Bayley and spent many a happy day on the seashore of the Long Island Sound, wandering and picking up seashells, just like I did beachcombing along the Virginia seashore of the Atlantic Ocean.